This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Final Four this weekend. The UConn ladies are no longer in the NCAA Women's Basketball Championship picture. And oh, by the way, the NBA is hellified. Stupid, crazy nice right now as we are heading to the final stretch of NBA playoff picture time. It just can't get any better, man. I mean, and it's not even April 1st. Like, fool you? No, fool me if you're thinking that I'm not going to keep my eyes off of all of this great NBA action taking place. Let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand, NBA aficionado, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, and also one of the flyest-looking brothers on a coffee mug that I've ever seen. My man Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. When you wake up in the morning and you hold up that ever shiny, glossy, you know what I'm saying, refreshing Baseline NBA podcast mug with your face on it, I mean, what does it say to you? What does it speak to you?
I don't know what it says to me. Maybe I feel maybe a little narcissism, but at the end of the day, it says that us together, our show has come a long way. That we're able to be put on mugs and be able to be put on T-shirts and cell phone cases and stickers and pillows and all of those things. So if you haven't supported us, shameless plug time alert. Make sure you're supporting the NBA Baseline podcast at TeePublic. You can get all of those great items for the low, at the Shaw Sports Store, or just search the Baseline NBA podcast and you'll find all that great stuff there. But salute to you, man. Salute to all the fans and listeners of NBA Baseline. Amazing show on top. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this one, man, so I can't wait to get right into it.
Definitely. Of course, we wanted to make sure that we drop this show around Easter weekend, so we want to, give our celebratories and make sure everybody has had a great Good Friday. We'll have a great Easter Sunday and happy Passover as well, too. So, we want to make sure that we are bringing joy in everyone's lives on this really, really ceremoniously religious weekend, but more importantly, it's of the spirit, it's of the resurrective spirit that we talk NBA basketball. And like my man Shaw says, man, it's all love up in here. We got a great show on tap. In a little bit in our segment of the breakdown, we will talk about which team can be the most dangerous when their stars return. Could it be the Timberwolves or could it be the Washington Wizards? And then in the segment of the drop, we'll talk about unbridled bias, picking players that most people are not paying attention to, but are certainly making noise in this upcoming season. So great topics on tap. Once again, be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. We're available on all the major platforms, so don't be afraid. You know what I'm saying? Get one of those platforms on your phone, on your iPad, on your tablet, on your Android, whatever you use. Download it. Find the Baseline NBA podcast. Allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it down.
Time now for the breakdown. Callie Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And our main topic for the breakdown, two very interesting teams, Shaw, that we have scrutinized at some point during the course of this season, yet with a little bit of intrepidation. We haven't been able to elevate them to where we should actually be talking about these teams as legitimate threats should they enter in the playoffs. And the likelihood is that they will be in the playoffs. And that's the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Washington Wizards. Now, by all accounts, we've always given the Washington Wizards not enough room for respect, because we've always believed that since, I want to say, 2015, 2016, this is a Washington Wizards team that should have improved themselves so that they should always be in the conversation of being a legitimate team in the Eastern Conference playoff picture. But injuries always tends to play itself out. But I just always think that there's some other underlying features that's happening. No one really buys into Scott Brooks being a legitimate head coach, although I do think that he is a respectable head coach and deserves a little bit more respect given what he's worked with Washington. And just the simple fact that we talk about this Washington Wizards team because you have the combination of Bradley Beal and John Wall, now we're bringing this conversation to this point where we're saying if John Wall returns, Bradley Beal is 100% healthy, the evolution of Otto Porter, Markieff Morris, is this team legitimately good enough that we should respect them to make noise in the Eastern Conference playoff picture, as opposed to when Jimmy Butler comes back for the Minnesota Timberwolves, what kind of impact he can have for the Timberwolves as they embark themselves in the Western Conference playoff picture?
Right. I think this is why we bring this up, because I think it's just a unique conversation where these are two wild card players on wild card teams. I think in the case of Minnesota, this was a roster that was as high. I believe they were as high as third at one point, or maybe fourth. Yeah, fourth. They weren't past San Antonio. They were as high as fourth in the West when Jimmy Butler was healthy. Then they had to kind of readjust. He went down, and they've had some hiccups, and now they're starting to get their things back on track. And it looks like they should make the playoffs. And with any of these things, it's going to be about matchups. But the purpose of this conversation is, okay, well, which team is just better equipped to make a deeper run? And I think in the case of Washington, they have the experience, right? You feel like if Wall comes back and he's looked like a shell of himself all entire season, but if he comes back and he's healthy, they've been together as a roster and felt very much like they should have beat Boston last year and made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. So to me, just based on that, you would have to hedge your bet maybe a little towards the Washington side. But then again, Minnesota have been playing better basketball, which would be Butler healthy. So it really doesn't matter. Again, I mean, it really matters who comes back and who's the healthiest. And I think this is why it's a great conversation to have.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed with regards to this Washington Wizards team is that you can look at this team and you can clearly see there's still a level of dependency that is weighted on what kind of player John Wall will be when the Washington Wizards has their star back. We've seen this team somewhat evolve to learn how to cope, but I don't know if whether or not this team has learned how to reconcile. So the way I mean by that is you look at the Golden State Warriors. You know, it's interesting how we bring up this conversation about, if Steve Kerr gets up on a microphone and says, well, I expect our team to be good or just as good with or without Steph Curry. And then the media goes on this all out blitz talking about, well, is Steve Kerr saying that the Golden State Warriors can get to the finals without Steph Curry? No. But if you're a head coach, your expectation should be, we should be good enough to beat teams, even if we don't have our star players, because everyone has to step up and do what Steph Curry is not capable of doing right now, at least physically, right? You have to buy into that conceptualization as a team. And one of the things I tend to worry about, and I think maybe this goes to the point, Shaw, of how we tend to look at Scott Brooks as a head coach. Does he lean on his team to really do what he always leaned on John Wall to give his team that the rest of the guys have to step up and do? And I'm saying that this year, Scott Brooks has kind of egged the Wizards in that direction. That regardless of what happens with John Wall, while we're not buying into the fact that they are going to be better than, say, the Cleveland Cavaliers if they don't have John Wall, Bradley Beal has to act like they're John Wall. Satoransky has to be that second guy. Markieff Morris has to step up. Kelly Oubre has to be that the X factor off the bench. All of these guys have got to step up and really buy themselves into the idea that they can do this with or without John Wall. Now, maybe John Wall will feel salty in some kind of way about it, but ultimately, if we're talking about which team could be more dangerous, if you're in the Eastern Conference, and this is a conference that is now completely wide open because no one talks with any confidence that the Cleveland Cavaliers are just going to walk themselves through the finals, no matter how good LeBron James is right now. You can make an argument that the Washington Wizards are becoming battle tested. If they do have John Wall, they'll be good. But if they don't have John Wall, they could be equally as dangerous because maybe Scott Brooks is figuring out a way to put his team in place to exact that same kind of mentality in the most critical times, which is the playoffs.
Well, I mean, I think that's an interesting way to look at it for sure. In framing the conversation, whether Wall or Butler comes back, which team is going to be more impactful. Again, I would still lean towards Washington simply because, again, the East. Your point about the East being maybe not as strong, or definitely not maybe not as strong as the Western Conference is great, and things are wide open. nobody really believes in Toronto. Everyone kind of feels like this is a down year for Cleveland, even with LeBron James playing at one of the best years he's ever even had statistically, and then Boston being again, an air quote, maybe a softer 2 seed, despite what Kyrie Irving and company have been able to do this year. So I think the East is extremely wide open, which opens things up for Washington specifically as a team that has a lot of swag about them in terms of their overall confidence, and maybe they are even overconfident at times. But the thing that concerns me the most about the Wizards is not so much Scott Brooks as it is so much as he's tried to develop this bench, but this bench still isn't all that amazing. Yes, Oubre is taking a nice leap forward this year, but Satoransky in lieu of John Wall has played well. So would he be able to keep that up, if Wall is still not 100%? And would he be able to go in there and spell those minutes? But when you're looking at down the line and the Mike Scotts and Mahinmis and Meeks and those guys, like, it's just not very sexy. And they're going to be extremely, extremely, extremely starter heavy, but we all know the playoff rotation is shortened down to usually to an 8 or 9 man lineup anyway. So in that case, they should be okay. But like for me, Washington seems to be a little bit ahead of the curve because you don't know. And I mean, I can't wait to see playoff Cat, playoff Wiggins, and all of those things. And Teague as a veteran guy, he's been there before, and Butler as a veteran guy has been there before, Gibson as well. But you just kind of feel like Washington would be more better equipped to handle the rigors and kind of the surprises that come up in the playoff NBA season.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a moment, Shaw, because to your point, you're saying that the Washington Wizards bench doesn't look sexy. Well, I want stout. I don't want sexy, right? And when I look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, it's an interesting scenario, right? That we're talking about here. If the Minnesota Timberwolves were in the Eastern Conference, how much danger would we add to their danger level as being the most dangerous team? If anything,
yeah,
they
quite a
to
bit.
me they mirror the Philadelphia 76ers in my estimation in some ways. So the fact that Joel Embiid has gone down to injury and we don't know how this is going to obviously impact the 76ers. They go to the playoffs. I look at this basketball team and I agree with you, Shaw. I would be more enamored to see what mode of play we see from the Big Cat and we see from Andrew Wiggins, because it virtually will be their first opportunity to participate in an NBA playoffs, right? But I look at skepticism with Taj Gibson, with Jeff Teague, with Derrick Rose. These are guys who have been in the playoffs, and these are guys who have kind of laid an egg, right? Like, these guys were expected to come in and contribute and help, and they've never found their place. Taj Gibson has been 1 year removed playing with a basketball team. He was supposed to help Russell Westbrook get over the, at least get past that first round. That never materialized. And I just tend to wonder that how much of this gets heightened now because they are in the Western Conference, that we take away from that part where we're saying, are they really going to be a dangerous basketball team simply because we're talking about the excitement of two really solid players and eventually when Jimmy Butler comes back, but then we harken right back to the fact that they're still surrounded by substandard parts. And part of that is because of the fact that these guys have not stepped up and performed in the playoffs.
Well, I think that's again. I think that's an interesting way to look at it as well, too, because it's easy for me to forget, very, very poignantly, because I'm not a big Jeff Teague fan per se, but he was a point guard on a team that went to the Eastern Conference Finals, that year with the Atlanta Hawks, and they ended up getting waxed by LeBron and the Cavs. But he was their leading man. He was the point guard in Indiana for a while as well, too. Playing alongside Paul George. So Teague in some ways is. Again, he's had some playoff experience and has some playoff success to some degree. Rose, I think, is relevant in terms of like what he's going to bring to the table in terms of his play. Maybe he has a nice moment here or two. I think he's more going to be kind of a locker room presence and maybe a guy who can talk to some of these guys about being in the playoffs previously. But I am interested to see what the guy like Jimmy Butler, who's had limited playoff success really in his career, but is still seen as an elite NBA guy, an elite NBA talent, and an elite NBA locker room guy, who's someone who's going to demand the most out of the guys he's playing with on a regular basis. For me, though, this is it comes down to another question too while we're having the conversation, because you brought up Scott Brooks a little while ago. I think in a lot of ways Tom Thibodeau has maybe he's fallen behind the curve a little bit in terms of at least in the perception of how great a coach he used to be perceived as. I don't think he's still up there. He's not being mentioned in the top 5 coaches anymore when you're having those like barbershop conversations, Twitter conversations, whatever. He's kind of fallen off of that. So I'm interested to see when he gets this team back into the playoffs, does he reestablish himself as a mastermind, as a guy who can make playoff adjustments and really feel the pulse of the game? Because I think Scott Brooks did a decent job, and in a lot of ways has been underrated, especially since his time in Washington. Like, he did a really good job with that team.
Well, I think that's part of the curse, right? You're maligned when you have a general manager that likes to take the kind of risks that he takes. So when you have scenarios where you draft like these marquee talented type players, like Russell Westbrook, like Kevin Durant, you look at a guy like Scott Brooks and you're saying, well, these guys, and you also have James Harden, right? Oh, well, these guys need to be in the finals every single year. And it, unfortunately, at times it just doesn't work that way. There are some head coaches that I do think in certain ways, they emulate a mind state that's more internal than external, right? Because when I look at Tom Thibodeau to me exudes the the ultra assistant head coach. I've yet to completely find my way into understanding him as a person, as being a head coach. And even during the years when he was with the Chicago Bulls, it's kind of like, you want to buy into him, like he's this, he's kind of an old school kind of guy, brushback kind of guy, but then he may have like a new way of thinking. I've always found it difficult, and I'm not taking anything away from him being a solid head coach. I think Tom Thibodeau is amongst one of the best coaches that are out there. But are we talking about best head coaches? Are we talking about one of the best assistant head coaches? Because sometimes when you're asked to do something of the next level, it may mean taking away what made you who you are at the level before that, right? We often talk about that in other sports genres, right? How many assistant head coaches has Bill Belichick had under his stewardship, have gone as head coaches and have basically laid an egg, right? But then they come right back and they, exact their greatness as being one of the greatest offensive coordinators in the game, being one of the greatest defensive coordinators in the game. I say the same thing with Alvin Gentry. I talk about how great Alvin Gentry is as an assistant head coach, but then you put him in a head coaching position and something changes. He's either marginalized or he is not as effective as how we continue to talk him up as a head coach. And these are the things that I tend to wonder about Tom Thibodeau and Scott Brooks at times. But the one thing I can't say about Scott Brooks is Scott Brooks has consistently shown that his teams can be effective. It's a matter of how long do you continue to go with Scott Brooks if he doesn't eclipse, which at this point is winning a championship. With Tom Thibodeau, you have a little wiggle room because he's never gotten even as far to an NBA Finals yet. So now you begin to wonder how much, how long do you work with him with this young core group that he has that's going to start saying, well, when do we start seeing the Minnesota Timberwolves in semifinals? When do we start seeing them in NBA Finals?
Yeah, really, when you look at that, it's funny to me because in the case of Tibbs, yes, he was an assistant coach that won a championship with the Celtics. Now it seems like that's a decade ago now, really.
And then it seems so far away. Oh my God!
Yeah, but again, as an assistant, and then he went to Chicago and then had that success, and then in some ways, it's almost unfair for in the case of Tibbs because we just will never know. Rose had the one phenomenal year. They got upset by that was the Heat, I guess, LeBron Heat teams. And then Rose was just never the same. So then Thibodeau never had the roster that was constructed to be built around him. And then he still did a good job with Rose in and out of the lineup. So, and I don't want to give too much leeway or too much role for Tibbs, but I think for the Bulls in that situation, we'll just never know if he could have got to the NBA Finals. In the case of Scott Brooks, he had everybody who he needed to have, other than when they traded James Harden away. And that team was still, could have done some great things. But probably that's where I think he was definitely criticized a little bit for not making better adjustments in the playoffs and some of the roster moves that didn't occur. And I feel in some cases he has learned from that situation, and maybe because he had to, because the talent level wasn't as amazing as it was in OKC with Westbrook and Durant as it is in Washington right now with Wall and Beal. Those guys aren't Westbrook and Durant. They're very good. They're all-star caliber players, but they're not franchise-altering players like how Durant and Westbrook are. So I think Scott Brooks has learned from his situation, but Thibodeau, again, he just didn't get the opportunity because Rose was never fully healthy.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our subject in the breakdown: which star players come back and make their team the most dangerous? Should they make the playoffs? Which there's the likelihood that will happen. So let's go ahead and circle back around to that part of the conversation, Shaw, because I will say this much. If we're talking about which team can be the most dangerous when their star players return, where do you see in as the playoff picture rounds out for the Washington Wizards and for the Minnesota Timberwolves? If Jimmy Butler returns, what do you think is necessary for him to bring to the table that is going to help the Minnesota Timberwolves advance? And if you're John Wall, what do you bring to the table that's going to help your Washington Wizards advance, at least into the first round? I'm curious to get your perspective from that.
Really and truly, for both of them, it's a certain level of energy and leadership, because neither one of those guys are not vocal. You know what I mean? You're gonna hear their voice. You're gonna see their exuberance on and off the basketball floor, in addition to what they produce statistically as well too. So I think those are two very charismatic players that are important for the culture of both of those rosters and those teams. And in the case of Butler, I think it is more of a leading by example in terms of even his defense. I don't think he's going to. I mean, well, maybe I shouldn't say this, because he's going to be coming back. He's going to be hobbled initially. So maybe offensively, he's not going to be there. But he's going to give maximum effort defensively. And I think that's where he's going to show those Timberwolves who haven't been in the playoffs before what playoff basketball is about. It is about digging in and diving and grinding and fighting through screens and maybe even getting a foul or two because you have to, because you want to show your physical toughness and grit. I think he's going to have to show that to them for the Minnesota Timberwolves to be to take a chance in advance. And it could be right now, the way it's set up as we record today, we're looking at potential OKC Minnesota 4-5 matchup. Like that's playoff gold. Like that's going to be a lot of fun. And in the case of Washington, they can finish anywhere between 6 and 8 right now. And I feel like really they probably are not excited to see the Cleveland Cavaliers when LeBron James. I'm sure they'd much rather line up against a hobbled Boston team, especially to try to exact some revenge against a roster that they feel like they should have beat last year anyway. And with Wall coming back, just again, the playmaking, the excitement, the chase down blocks that he does defensively as well too. And if he has to go against a guy who we'll talk about a little bit later on, but my young son Terry Rozier, as opposed to Kyrie Irving in the first round, I think that's a matchup that Wall could potentially really feast on and get his legs back and have Washington make a sizable run in the playoffs if they match up with Boston in the first round.
Man, they don't want no part of Terry Rowe.
That's my son, though.
Roe v. Fade. That's the signature move, baby. Roe v. Fade. You know what I'm saying? He'll put it on the Washington Wizards. They don't want no part of Terry Rozier. All right, let me first talk about John Wall. If you are the Washington Wizards and you get John Wall back, the Washington Wizards need that 9.3 assists per game John Wall. I don't think they necessarily need 19, 20 point per game or 20 plus point per game John Wall. And the reason why I say this, the Washington Wizards have looked like a decent basketball team without John Wall as far as playing collectively. But the one thing that I do think, and it's always been something that I've said, is the problem with the Washington Wizards, they need to figure out what they really want to be. If they're not going to be fully committed to their defense, they need to be fully committed to their offense. Okay? This team has not completely improved themselves defensively in a way that makes you feel confident that when they do get into the playoffs, they can lean on shutting down teams. I think it's more so leaning on who they're matched up against that you would feel more reliant that they're going to step up and play better defense. So if I'm the Washington Wizards, I need ball movement and I need easy scoring opportunities. And your best equipped person to do that is your best ball handler, which is John Wall, which means that the ball comes out of Bradley Beal's hands and Bradley Beal is more free to execute coming off the dribble drive situations where I don't feel like isolation basketball, which is what you tend to see a lot of times when the Washington Wizards are stuck in their offensive ruts. And I can't blame Scott Brooks for that, because at times they seem to struggle how to get that ball where it needs to be for certain guys to play. They've looked decent, but they don't look effective. If you are the Minnesota Timberwolves, though, Shaw, I agree with you. I think that if the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to give themselves any chance to make it competitive, whether they're in the first round or even to get past the first round, doesn't matter who they play, they have to get defense. And defense usually means getting your best player to lock down the opposing team's best player. And the best versatility that you get is not Andrew Wiggins, it's Jimmy Butler. And I know it's a tall load to ask because he's a guy that comes in and gives you 22. But I believe that if the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to get out of the Western Conference in any shape or form, they have to learn how to play good defense because that's how the good teams are going to advance in the Western Conference, even though all of them are offensively potent for one, in one way, shape, or form. I mean, you could even make the argument that Utah Jazz can be an offensively potent basketball team, right? But to be good in the Western Conference, it's that old adage, defense wins championships, and ultimately defense is what's going to help the Minnesota Timberwolves give themselves the best opportunity to compete or advance at least in the first round of the playoffs.
You're 100% correct there. And again, like I said, we preface all of this by saying matchups are going to dictate a lot of things. And in the case of Minnesota, they can go as high as potentially 4. Don't see them being able to catch Portland at 3. But if they end up in first round with a first round home court, then that's going to do a lot for their psyche as well too. Where in the case of Washington, that's not very likely at this point for them to catch anywhere. Catching the Philadelphias or Clevelands of this world, they're pretty much 4 or 5 games out. Where Minnesota is. It's 3 games out of 3, but they're tied essentially for 4, but they just don't have the tiebreaker, And I feel like another wild card we can put into this scenario and situation, which we haven't really talked about. We'll talk about maybe for a couple seconds here right now, is in the case of Kawhi Leonard and the San Antonio Spurs. So I mean, if Minnesota gets Butler back and they somehow end up in a Spurs matchup, whether that's in some sort of 4-5 thing, depending on which one of those two teams have home court. Is San Antonio a team that you're lining up to play against, especially since Kawhi hasn't been back. So and it could go the other way. I think for teams playing either one of these rosters, right? Because you feel like, okay, to some degree, Washington has got some sort of identity without Wall, but they're not better without John Wall. But does him coming back and trying to work himself back into play, does that hinder them? And the same thing for Minnesota. And I feel like Jimmy Butler, and this is really just an arbitrary statement. I like there's no real basis to it. So I'll preface it by saying that. But I think Butler is better equipped to play, and well, no, that makes some sense. He's better equipped to play without the ball in his hands than John Wall is, obviously, and he can find a way to impact the basketball game without necessarily having to score an assist. I think he'll rebound, he'll play defense, even if he's not healthy 100%. And that's why I think he can be more impactful per se. But I still feel like Washington has a better overall danger level just because of their overall experience being in the playoffs.
Yeah, I will definitely agree with you on that particular point. And I think it's also about mentality. Okay. Certain guys, they come in and they can rub players the wrong way, especially when they come off of injury. Because let's not sugarcoat this. John Wall, I think, is feisty, right? I think he's going to be really feisty when he comes back because he's going to be riding a lot of speculation about the kind of player that he is, about all of these little rumors, these tantric rumors, how he may actually be more corrosive and that this team looks like that they want to play together, want to play for each other a whole lot more than worrying about whether or not John Wall does or doesn't come back. If you're John Wall, you're obviously playing for something and it may seem a little selfish, but you got to figure out a way to turn that where it could be, cohesive, right? Inclusive, where everybody on the team feels like they're a part of something. I'll harken back not too long ago with the Isaiah Thomas scenario, right? Like I respect Isaiah Thomas and his situation and what transpired and how, he was done dirty by the Boston Celtics in a way, for what happened. But you also have to recognize too that when you come in, and whatever chip that you have on your shoulder, it can't be so, singularly minded that it alienates everybody else's perception about how they see you and how you are seen in the locker room. And that's where Isaiah Thomas got off on the wrong foot. And eventually he got ousted, right? Got being sent to the Los Angeles Lakers. And injuries aside, it's got nothing to do with it. It's about what kind of impact you're going to have when you do come from injury. Because let's keep in mind, You've been gone this whole period of time. And while people want to continue to bombard you with the questions about, well, are you going to be good enough if your boy comes back? Or can you maintain? Or will you even make the playoffs? Or you guys might not even make the playoffs? Or all that speculation. You and the rest of these other guys are basically speaking for you, right? So if you're John Wall, you have to appreciate that your teammates have held the fort down for as long as they have, and now you're ready to come back. You got to make sure that your mentality is set so that whatever itch you have, whatever chip you've got on your shoulder is inclusive to everyone else on that team so that they feel it as well too. So you all collectively go out and prove what a lot of the media and a lot of the pundits have been skeptical about this Washington Wizards team because John Wall was injured for all this period of time.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the really unique things about the Washington Wizards. Sometimes they have this talent, they have this chip and aura about themselves, but they even have a chip and aura within themselves. Like, there's a question of whether they even like each other. And there was a whole situation whether the team was better without Wall and the ball was moving more, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, well, how is the ball movement better when you take out a guy who averages 9 points, 2 assists a game, and there's the whole Gortat Wall thing that happened during this season as well too. So I think they maybe smoothed some of those things over. At least you would hope so. But again, that's why I think Washington is such an interesting team, an interesting roster, because they hate everybody, but you're not even sure they like themselves. So I can't wait to see what happens when he gets back and how these final 5 games or so when he's back, what that's going to look like for them. And I think that's why another reason Washington will probably have a leg up, because Wall will come back before the regular season is over, more than likely. Where Butler, we're still not sure if Butler is back before the regular season. It might be like the last 1 or 2 games as opposed to 5 or 6 games, where Wall will have his time to try to integrate himself.
Well, listen, it's all not rainbows and the pot of gold over the rainbow type situations right now. Both of these teams are still fighting for position in the playoffs. Not even to just be in the play. I mean, not just to be but also to participate in the playoffs. So it's going to be really interesting down the stretch. But like you said before, Shaw, we both lean on the idea that if Jimmy Butler comes back, he will have the most impact for the Washington Wizards. But ultimately, given where the Washington Wizards are and the conference that they play in, John Wall comes back, they literally can be the most dangerous team in the Eastern Conference and basically between the two teams respectively. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, The Baseline NBA podcast. This week, our topic on The Drop, unbridled bias. My man Shaw clearly wants me to go in with a headache over Easter weekend with this particular topic. But it's okay. He's my brother. We've known each other since we're little youth. So I'm gonna try my best to ride this thing out as best as I possibly can. But the topic is called unbridled bias. We're looking at players that people are not paying attention to, but are certainly staking their name to the game. And you have a couple of interesting players, Shaw, and I've been, scourging and digging real hard, bro. Digging real hard. I mean, like, you know what I'm saying? Like shovel journey to the center of the earth digging, like trying to find some dudes. But I think I found a couple of people, which if everyone is still caught up in the hype about the NBA, they should be able to respect the fact that these guys under the radar are balling out until we are falling out. And so I'm going to let you start it off, Shaw. You give me somebody that you have unbridled bias. His game is being recognized right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've taken it maybe slightly different context per se. It's really just like, it's like a man crush. Who do we in some way, maybe for some unknown reason, just really like? There's certain players in the league that, they just get you going. They're excited about, like the people who really love Nick Young, the people who really love the J.R. Smiths of the world, if you will. It's like you just want to see those guys win because it's fun and it's great and it's exciting. And I think mine is a little bit of that and a little bit more of just like at least I think basketball relatable. But they're definitely my young sons, as I said earlier in the show. Like these are my guys who I'm rooting for and have been rooting for a little while. And if you follow me on Twitter, this isn't no BS. If you follow our show, this isn't no BS, because I've been talking about these guys as much as I can And first on my list is, again, young son from the Boston Celtics, Terry Rozier. That's my guy. I just feel like this is a basketball player where when he came into the league, nobody understood why Dan Age took him as high as he did in the teens. Like nobody got that. Coming out of Louisville and just like, all right, well, they reached for this guy. He's somebody who would have been available in the late 20s, perhaps, maybe even in the second round, et cetera, et cetera. And Age went out there and jumped and got him. And year after year, he's improved his basketball game. And I really look at this, and I'm about to put this on Twitter as well too. There was a guy way back in the day where I was like, yo, this guy can really play. If he gets his minutes, he's going to be a problem. And that was Kyle Lowry. And Terry Rozier reminds me a little bit of that. Obviously, not the exact same skill set. Rozier isn't quite the acute passer that Lowry is. But there's a lot of that similarity in terms of what their game represents. And I feel like if Rozier starts to get into that realm, and it probably won't be on the Boston Celtics, unfortunately, where he starts to gets those minutes, you're going to see a guy truly, truly blossom moving forward. I'll just do this really quickly. Year 3 comparisons, Kyle Lowry to Terry Rozier. Lowry was at 8.5 points per game, 3.6 assists, 2.8 rebounds in 23 minutes. Rozier this year really coming off the bench, 7.1 points, 2 assists, 3.4 rebounds in 18.6 minutes, almost 5 minutes less, and very comparable numbers. Then when you extrapolate that out to 36 minutes per game, they're very, very similar. 13.8 for Rozier, 13.1 for Lowry. And again, not say that Rozier is going to be Kyle Lowry, but at some point, Rozier is going to be commanding a team, and he's going to need to get his money. And my second guy is going to be Mario Hezonja from the Orlando Magic. That's my dude. Super athletic young guy.
This is 3 weeks in a row we are bringing up Mario Hezonja. Is that what it is?
This is two. It's two.
Oh, it's two. Okay.
But Hezonja, Orlando made a mistake, and really due to all the injuries that happened in Orlando this year, they were forced to play him. They had no choice. And he was like, all right, I'm going to show you what's up. And he's played extremely well in the minutes he's gotten in Orlando. And I feel like they're gonna miss on the fact that they weren't able to at least maybe able to match him. And not to say that there's no chance he comes back to Orlando, but there's just no reason for him to. I think he's going to go somewhere and truly blossom in a system that's going to utilize his skills and talent. So again, I talked a lot. Let you get into this. We can jump back to Hezonja a little bit if you want to, but I want to make sure that you get your opportunity as well.
Oh my God. All right. Well, first, I think those are great picks. All right. I'm not going to knock you for bringing up Mario again. Listen, eventually you're going to have to call him Super Mario. Okay. I mean, eventually this is going to have to happen. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the way you're talking him up, I won't be surprised if he's going to be on the front of the Super Mario's, whatever new version of Nintendo game system that's going to be out there. Was it the Nintendo Switcheroo? Whatever. Mario Hezonja is going to be that dude. Okay. So there's no question. He just needs to be on a team that's going to truly respect his gameplay, his game level, and allow him to go out there and do his thing. I believe that in many respects, he is a starting version of Manu Ginobili. Very quickly on Terry Rozier. There's not a statistic that really stands out to me about Terry Rozier. It's his gameplay. It's his mentality. He's got a little Kyrie in him, right? And I that's what I love, because when you look at this Celtics basketball team, if there's still a level of hesitance in guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to go out there and get you buckets, somebody's got to go out there and get you buckets. And Terry Rozier, to me, feels like he wants to be that guy to go out there and get you buckets, regardless if he has to play next to Kyrie Irving or Kyrie Irving is not on that basketball court. He's going to go out there and he's going to get his. And I really like the fact that Brad Stevens allows him to go out and do that. And he's shooting the basketball. Most guys believe that they have to assume a certain role, and they seem very hesitant, so they don't tend to kind of branch themselves out and really utilize the tools in their game. It's not just the statistics, it's just his heady gameplay and his aggressiveness that he's going to go out and he's going to get his, which eventually means that the Celtics are going to get theirs. There's a couple of guys that I want to make mention to and maybe break some bread. And I can't believe I'm saying this, because this really speaks to why we kind of talk about the New York Knicks in this conundrum. I just don't understand how the Knicks can't get this right, man. You got two players, man, that are out there right now that I really think that are just shining. And you just don't know what's going to happen with these guys. Trey Burke and Emmanuel Mudiay, okay? You remember how we had this conversation a while back, Shaw? I forgot who it was that we brought on the show that covered the Denver Nuggets. It was one of our female beat reporters who she was not enamored with Emmanuel Mudiay. Just was not
Yeah,
enamored by him,
yeah,
right?
Ashley Douglas. Ashley Douglas.
Ashley Douglas. There you go. Our girl Ashley. And you know what? It was very much justified because the dynamic of that basketball team just did not fit what Emmanuel Mudiay was bringing to the table. And for the longest time, we kept talking about how the Knicks need some kind of consistency from the point guard position. And somehow, some way, Trey Burke has an epiphany. Emmanuel Mudiay has a hoops redemption, and both of these guys coming over to New York are balling out. Which now begs to differ. If you're the New York Knicks, what do you do, right? Because honestly, for me, I would love to see these two guys kind of live up to the hype that they brought coming into their respective college in their respective NBA drafts, right? Trey Burke, 2013 first round draft pick. Manuel Mudiay, 2015 first round draft pick. And both of these guys have just been wayward point guards. But if you watch their game and you watch how they play, if they are given an opportunity and they're given a chance, they literally could be some really quality guys.
Well, I think that's going to be very tough for New York to develop all of those guys, and you just don't know
Exactly. So
that
one of
all
them
of
is
them
going to
can be
wind
there,
up going somewhere. One of
right?
them is going to go.
And hey, I'll be the first to tell you, I was a big Trey Burke guy coming out of Michigan. I thought he was gonna, set the world on fire. But let me tell you this too, and I think I've told this story on the podcast before. Out in Las Vegas Summer League, the year Dante Exum was drafted, our guy Tony Jones from the Salt Lake Tribune told me, kind of like in a scrum, a bunch of guys just kind of talking hoops or whatever. He's like, listen, Exum's gonna make Burke expendable, maybe next year. And I was like, all right, that seems a little, far fetched, but all right, no problem. And sure enough, Burke was a guy who they ended up punting on, and they let him go. He didn't play well in Washington, and then he was in the G League, and now he's getting this late season opportunity with the Knicks, and really just probably is one of those comeback stories that, again, he's taking the game more seriously and just understands kind of it. And I hope he does have a level of success that suits him, because he's a good kid, and I think he just got off to a bad start in his NBA career. A lot of pressure was put on him. In the case of Mudiay, though, just the athletic ability, the comparisons that came out with Mudiay, especially early on, were okay. Well, he's going to be potentially like a John Wall type of player, not John Wall, but a John Wall type-ish player, like Bizarro Wall. Because he's playing the game.
Bizarro Wall, like
yeah, he's playing the game too fast, and he's got to slow it down. And remember when Wall came in the league, he was going 1,000 miles an hour 1,000% of the time. And you just need to be able to pick your spots, in essence, to use your speed and to understand how the game and how it moves and how it flows. And for the case of Mudiay, I said I think this is going to be just very problematic because of the Knicks organization. Now you have this guy, you have Little Keen on there as well too. How can all three of these guys develop and mold and really grow together? So for me, I don't see how it's going to happen.
And you have to pick your poison, because remember, they did this without Kristaps Porzingis in the lineup.
Exactly.
So when he comes back, he is going to be the man. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, and then you have an emerging Tim Hardaway if you want to kind of give him that nod as well too. So they have a problem on their hands, and again, I guess you can maybe think it's a good problem to have. But you may want to flip.
No,
one
it's never.
it's
never. But Shaw, it's never a good problem, because the Knicks. Listen, first of all, there's going to be another conversation about whether or not Jeff Hornacek is going to be the head coach for this team come next year, right? Because all signs are pointing to the fact that they want to let go of Jeff Hornacek, and that there's speculation that they want to make a play maybe for Mark Jackson. And I don't have a problem with that. But my problem is that the New York Knicks, again, they don't have an identity about what this basketball team really needs to be. Right. So now, if you're telling me you want to go get yourself a head coach, are you getting a head coach who's going to help once again change the culture, of the New York Knicks, whatever that culture is supposed to be? And if so, does that now compromise what you're seeing from the personnel that you've got on there? You know what I'm saying? It's one thing if this was a development process and they all came together, but it's all jagged, man. And that's the thing that really frustrates me, because what I'm seeing from Trey Burke, you would not have seen it had he been playing with the Washington Wizards. What I'm seeing from Trey Burke, you would not have seen if he'd been playing with the Utah Jazz. What I'm seeing from Emmanuel Mudiay, I don't think you would have seen that in Denver, albeit I will say that Emmanuel Mudiay seems to cater more to Jeff Hornacek. So now you have to start asking yourself the question. If you start bringing some of these guys in there and they're actually effective players under a certain head coach, and then you're just going to dash that away because you want to go after the sexier pick or the New York pick or whatever that pick is supposed to be, what does that mean for all of this talent? Now, I'm not saying that the players should not make adjustments. You should make adjustments. What I am saying is that if New York Knicks fans are excited about seeing these guys go out there and just ball, and even if they win or lose, they're at least showing you something. Now you're going to throw that away because you still have to risk changing something that doesn't seem to match what these guys were always considered as wayward players for on other teams.
Well, that's what happens when management drafts players and then management is no longer there, and that's the case of Phil Jackson and Lakina. So that is he drafted a point guard who was going to fit the system that he was trying to implement, and then he was let go unceremoniously a couple months later. And now in the case of Moutier, this is this management's trade per se. They acquired this player, but they also signed Trey Burke. Both Moutier and Burke are have contracts next season as well too, guaranteed money. Minimal amounts. Moutier at like 4.2, Trey Burke at 1.8. So that's not killing anybody's salary cap, and so you can keep those guys. And Lakina, by virtue of his draft position, is at 4.1 as well too. Again, not killing anyone's salary, but he's going to be the guy if you're going to try to move because he doesn't fit the system that you're trying to run. Then he's going to be the guy who could maybe get you another asset of some sort, because there might still be interest, for teams maybe looking to develop a young point guard who feel like he has some talent and some skill. Again, they probably have to sell pennies on the dollars a little bit. They're not going to get a top 5 pick for him, but maybe there's something that they can move him for. But it's interesting to me in essence that of all the players in the world, these are your crushes here, Trey Burke and Emmanuel Moutier.
But here's my thing, Shaw, and I want to play devil's advocate real quick. How is it that it's so difficult if you're the New York Knicks to not get this right, and the Boston Celtics have managed to get this right? I mean, let's keep in mind, Terry Rozier was here before Kyrie Irving, right? He was there when there was Isaiah Thomas. So it isn't as it, so like the man crush that you have for Terry Rozier, I think is now heightened even more because he has played through the adversity of not being recognized as a legitimate guard, right? And is playing like a legitimate guard under the guise of superstar type talent, right? Let me not use the word superstar. All-star to superstar type talent in Isaiah Thomas and Kyrie Irving. Now we can look at that and say, you know what? That could be a slight of respect. When is Terry Rozier going to get his shine? You can kind of expound on that if you want to, but the point of the matter is that when he comes out there, he gives you exactly what it is that gives us the reason to even question that. And he's been through that. Whereas if the New York Knicks, again, the fact that you have the luxury of two guys like this, and let's keep this in mind. Trey Burke and Emmanuel Moutier are not identical players, okay? There's differences in their games, and they come from the fact that they played in different systems and have been learning kind of under those systems and have had to change it up a little bit. But the fact that they recognize for them to get minutes on the court under Jeff Hornacek, they have changed their game. They've switched it up a little bit. Trey Burke is becoming a better shooter. Emmanuel Moutier is becoming more aggressive. Things that I think they struggled with their other previous teams. And the fact that the Knicks still can't figure out a way to get this right at the end of the day, because they're going to screw this up. They're going to figure out a way to screw this up. To me, it's a travesty at times because we're watching two really good kids at the not even at the peak of their game. They're on the come up. And somehow, some way, if it doesn't play right, we're going to suppress them once more.
Yeah. Well, with New York, they put themselves in this situation, and I want to see how they dig themselves out of it for sure. And management hasn't been at its best in terms of evaluating talent. They got Porzingis right, so give them credit for that. But not everything else has gone the way that they've wanted to. But again, it's going to be fun to watch how Porzingis, when he's back next year, is Ntilikina, is Trey Burke, Moutier, are they all still there as well too, trying to play off the big unicorn, if you will. And that's what we'll have to wait and see. But I think these are going to be some players, and especially in the case of Burke, who might have figured it out. And there's probably another segment we can do at another time, because I think there's a lot of great kind of comeback stories this year. And I think we will do that segment maybe next week. Looking at Trey Burke, even Marshawn Brooks, Brandon Jennings came back. Got Emeka Okafor, all these.
Okafor, yeah.
Yeah, all these guys who kind of came back this year, who've had varying degrees of success throughout their career and are now finding their roles in different spots. So, I think in the case of Burke, it's one that I personally am attached to because I really like the kid coming out of Michigan and I want to see him succeed. So, that's definitely as we have this conversation, we're bleeding into next week's topic as well too.
Hoops redemption. Hoops redemption.
Man.
You know it's coming. Great stuff. You're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. Heartbreaking news again, man, for IT. Isaiah Thomas, he will be gone for 4 months. He just recently had hip surgery. I mean, I just feel so disheartened by this, man. I mean, if there's a guy that I really wish had an opportunity not to just get a big payday, but to be out there on the basketball court balling, it would be Isaiah Thomas. And again, this setback, man, this is really going to severely hurt any opportunity that this man will have about seeing any kind of long-term deal with any team come this upcoming offseason. Yeah,
he's probably going to have to do the 1, maybe 2 year deal, maybe like team option second year type of thing, maybe heavily incentivized. Our girl Ashley Douglas actually just wrote something on my website, Shaw Sports, about Isaiah's last 2 years, the rise and fall of being a top 5 MVP candidate now to struggling to maintain on a roster, maintain his health, if you will. And that's against the sad story because Isaiah is a great guy, great personality, really buys into whatever team he's in because he just wants to be loved, man. He just wants to have a home, and hopefully he finds that peace within his basketball career this summer.
Yeah, well, I just hope that this doesn't become a situation where we start talking about the ones that could have. I just would love to see Isaiah on that basketball court, and I just hope that this hip surgery, he takes the necessary time, number one, to really give himself opportunity to heal, to rest, and then more importantly, number two, that he puts himself in the best position to really negotiate something tangible, given everything that's happened to him over the last couple of years. I just would love to see that guy back on the court.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and really see. Embiid is tweeting in a very positive tone, and all signs are according to him.
That must mean that he must be serenading Rihanna. Yeah.
Well, I think that ship has sailed. But in the case of Embiid, he's trying to allude that he'll be back much sooner and that they'll be able to weather the storm without him, and he'll be back to try to make it happen for this Philadelphia team again. It would be a massive blow, and ironically, Fultz being involved in it in any way, shape, or form in the week that he just came back himself, he just kind of makes it more, crazy in every way, shape, and form. But hopefully we'll see, trust the process and be back out there very, very soon.
It's definitely. All right, out in Cleveland, the King breaks a big record. He breaks MJ's record of the most consecutive games with 10+ points. Big accomplishment, especially when you look at how he was able to do it and how short a time frame he was able to do it, y'all.
Yeah. Again, I've said this before as well too. I'm just stunned and amazed at this year what that guy has been able to do. How he's still impressing us and still doing things that we're just like, wow, that just couldn't have seen that coming. So kudos to on this amazing season that LBJ is constructing, man. And again, I'll wait to see what happens in the playoffs, man, because I'm sure something else is sure to come up as well.
Yeah, and listen, if I'm LeBron James, I would vote for me too, especially after breaking this damn record, even though it may not mean much of what it's supposed to mean for the regular season. But I'm just saying, listen, he is the NBA's MVP right now, all around. Also, Shaw, Kemba Walker out in Charlotte. Big ups to him. He passes Del Curry as the Hornets' all-time leading scorer. Very impressive. For a guy who's been with that team since draft time. They finally give him his props, and he's shown them that same respect by going out there and beating Steph's dad.
Yo, Kemba is a real one, and if you saw the interview he had with Stephanie Reddy post game, he cheered up and missed all the rumors of potentially being traded before the deadline, et cetera. And you can't sing a kid who's not supposed to be here. As we talked about, was that last week's show as well too. Where he is in terms of 3-point percentage, 3-pointers made, everything. Like he just works so hard to be an amazing professional and all-star caliber NBA player. And I salute that kid. Kemba Walker is a great guy with great character. And I wish nothing but the best for him for all of his NBA career. Just a good dude, man.
Yeah, and I hope that they will finally put him with a team that's going to allow him to be in playoff pictures for years to come, man. He's an exciting basketball player, and he's one of those guys we always talk about in the all-star picture. he should be out there competing in postseason play somehow, some way. So MJ, you know what I'm saying? You're feeling a little salty that LeBron just took your record. We'll go put together a team to go beat LeBron's team in the Eastern Conference and make that thing happen. Give Kemba Walker a chance. He'll go out and take care of business. All right, Shaw. Finally, some big shout outs and kudos. Jason Kidd, Steve Nash, Grant Hill, and Mo Cheeks confirmed in the Naismith Hall of Fame. Couldn't be well deserved, man. And this is an impressive class for 2017-2018.
Yeah, I don't have any qualms with any of it at all. I think the one caveat to that is it looks like Chris Webber will not get in again for the second straight year. He might be one of those guys who gets nominated, 4 or 5 times before he actually gets in. But that's not to take away from the shine of obviously first ballot, nominations in the case of Nash and Kidd and, for Hill, for all those guys to get in, and even Mo Cheeks too. Again, it's a great accomplishment to ever be recognized in this. It's a great accomplishment to be nominated, but once you get in, you putting on that jacket, like I said, that your class, and I'm very excited for all those guys. I enjoyed watching all of them play throughout their NBA careers.
Shaw, real quick, if Chris Webber gets in, what do you think that he gets in more on, his collegiate career or his NBA career? Or do you think that he gets in because of the Fab Five?
Well, yeah, I think it would be the combination of the two, and it would have to be for him because I think NBA statistics alone don't necessarily represent enough for him to get in. I saw that last year when McGrady got in over him, and I was like, well, okay, well then there you go. What it boils down to.
Right.
But this is the Basketball Hall of Fame, so when it turns about what he did for the culture of basketball and then playing in the Fab Five in Michigan and what he did there, and then in that time and then getting to the NBA too, those two things, really should make it happen for him eventually. Had he won a championship with the Kings, I think he's in already. But unfortunately, that didn't go the way that it was supposed to. Thank you, Mr. Referee. But nevertheless, Webber has had a great NBA career, a great professional basketball career, and I think he'll get in eventually.
Yeah, I don't have no doubts. I think he should get in. I think he's deserving to get in. I've never been much of this whole, first ballot, first time in type of stuff. I just think that your accolades, and your work, your body of work should put you in. And I don't care, how often, how long. I don't understand why we always have to play these percentages of only electing a certain few, or you got to just get the guys in. They've done enough. If we talk about them enough and they're in our, they're in our thoughts enough, we express it, we follow them enough. At some point, they're going to be in there. They should be in there.
I'll say this really quickly, too. Our guy, Joe Cardosi, he hit us up on Twitter and was like, he was a little surprised that Hill got in over Webber. And I said, you know what? There still may be some salty people over kind of the Michigan scandal that Webber was involved in.
That's very much true. And the fact that he lied to the grand jury, right? And he skated on that. But again, and that's the reason why I brought up the whole point about should the Fab Five actually be inducted into the Hall of Fame? Because listen, guys like Ray Jackson, who else am I thinking of? Not just Jalen Rose, Jimmy King, like those guys. Howard. Yeah, those guys. They're most. They didn't even make any noise in the NBA themselves. But what they did in college basketball and what they did for college basketball, I think speaks volumes to a time and an era that is poignant and significant when we talk about Hall of Fame. And so, again, if you're not going to give Chris Webber his due, not just from a statistical standpoint, give it to him from a cultural standpoint of how he helped influence the game of basketball. We did it with Allen Iverson. His numbers clearly put him in there, but he also was a cultural phenomenon for the game of basketball, and that just can't be ignored.
Nope, absolutely can't. And I think that those are great points. And again, it's like you said, it's the Basketball Hall of Fame. So it is the cultivation of all of the work, professional, off the court as a coach, perhaps, but whatever it is. So I think at some point, Webber does get in. But again, I don't want to take anything away from these guys who've gotten in because they all deserve it and they've all contributed to the game of basketball in a major way.
Most definitely, man. This has been another phenomenal show. My man Shaw and I doing it lovely and giving you a little something as you come fresh off of your Easter weekend, your Easter holiday. And for a lot of kids up here in the North Shaw, it's spring break time. So, they have a little bit of free time in their hands. They get to listen to two dopest voices discussing basketball in the NBA, man. It's a good thing.
Well, it's always a good thing to have our show and to get people to engage with us. So, make sure you're listening, make sure you're following. hit us up. It's getting to be about that time where it's going to get real bubbly, real lively on social media as well too. So we'll be upping our game and putting out maybe some some shorter shows to kind of intersect with some of the things that are happening, especially in these playoff races and in both conferences as it gets real tight between the 4 and 8 seeds really in both conferences. So good times ahead for all of us as NBA basketball fans, and I can't wait to do it with you, my brother, as always.
Most definitely. So for the Baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys, each and every single one of you. We'll catch up with you